To the average American from the north, Brazil has seemed a remote and strange land of jungles, rivers, and mountains, with but one great center of civilization, Rio de Janeiro. Many had heard of Rio's fabled beauty. Some knew the name of its Copacabana beach and even dreamed of a winter vacation there. But even those Americans who have been to Brazil have seldom seen much more of it than Rio, with its broad, handsome streets, its mixture of modern and traditional architecture, and its friendly people, most of whom are far more conscious of the U.S. than the U.S. citizen is of Brazil. The one picturesque fact about Brazil the pre-war North American might well have been aware of was that Rio, during the annual carnival, is one of the gayest spots in the world. Though the U.S. Embassy at Rio had always been an important diplomatic post, the fortunes of war made Ambassador Jefferson Caffrey a key man in the American diplomatic corps. For in 1940, crucial year of World War II, the collapse of France placed Brazil in a position of vital strategic importance. Only 1,600 miles at its bulge from Vichy French West Africa, Brazil could either have become the landing point of a Nazi invasion, or it could have become a vast air base from which the United Nations, avoiding the blocked Mediterranean, might have carried the fight to Hitler in the Near East. What part Brazil was to play in the war depended upon the decision of its president, Getulio Vargas, a man distrusted by many liberal Americans. They knew Vargas to be a dictator, ruling 41 million people by arbitrary decree. In Brazil's propaganda bureau, busy glorifying Vargas and his works, they suspected a similarity to the propaganda methods of fascist Spain and Nazi Germany. They knew that Vargas was beholden, for the existence of his regime, to the Army and Navy officers who had supported his bloodless national revolution, and that many of Brazil's military caste were at least as sympathetic to fascism as to democracy. From Brazil, too, had come alarming reports of potentially dangerous foreign groups, ready to rise at the first opportunity. In Minas Gerais, Amazonas, and Sao Paulo were more than 200,000 Japanese, whose communities were reported to be hotbeds of undercover pro-Axis activity. In Rio Grande do Sul and Santa Catarina were 1 million Germans in scores of settlements, as German in architecture, language, and customs as the Third Reich itself. Each settlement was reported to have its active Nazi cell, carrying on in the provinces the work Hitler's agents were secretly furthering in Rio de Janeiro. But U.S. diplomats working with Brazil's Foreign Office reported that in Foreign Minister Oswaldo Aranha, the United States and its democratic allies had a great and good friend. To these experts, President Vargas' regime was no fascist state, but a benevolent personal dictatorship which had won wide popular acclaim. If not democratic, it was to a large degree progressive and even liberal. To increase education and better the lot of the common people has been from the first an aim of the government. Doubling Brazil's educational budget, it has built close to 10,000 new schools as part of its campaign to wipe out illiteracy. It has made free medical care available to school children of all ages in a determined effort to set new standards of national health. Brazil's government has also attacked the health problem by constructing sewage systems in regions where modern sanitation had been almost unheard of. To combat malaria, it is ridding its swamps of the Anopheles mosquito. In this and other public health projects, U.S. medical men have been called in to teach techniques which Brazilian doctors will employ on a national scale. By its program of government housing, by its social and labor legislation, the government is today making good its promise to improve conditions among Brazil's people. Brazil's economic prosperity has always depended on coffee, of which it has produced 65% of the world's supply. This great export crop was the backbone of the Brazilian national income. But in 1940, Brazilians found that the collapse of the European coffee markets had almost wrecked an industry which had been in distress since 1930. U.S. diplomats realized with alarm that if Brazil's economy were allowed to break down, the friendly government of Getulio Vargas might not long survive. To meet the crisis, the U.S. government underwrote the entire unshipped balance of Brazil's coffee crop for 1941, 1942, and 1943. Meantime, U.S. credits were helping to build railroads, to open up for development the untouched riches of Brazil's interior, as part of a project to industrialize the nation and give it a more stable and varied economy. For Brazil, today still largely agricultural, is one of the world's potentially great industrial nations, especially because of its immense mineral wealth. For great new steel mills now building in Brazil, the U.S. has advanced credits of many millions of dollars. Steel from Monlevada and Volta Redonda are building railroads, first to open up more mines and then to serve new industrial centers. Even before World War II, the United States had become aware that in Brazil was almost half the population of South America, a market still untapped when the war clamped down on American production for civilian export trade. And U.S. businessmen planning for peace have foreseen that as Brazil's process of industrialization continues, its buying power may reach a colossal figure. In the pre-war decade, industrialization had already brought great changes to Brazil. By an audacious electrification project near Sao Paulo, rivers were diverted and sent plunging over steep natural escarpments, where they were harnessed to create an immense power supply. Out of this development came the astonishing growth of Sao Paulo, Brazil's second city and its greatest industrial center. Between 1920 and 1940, Sao Paulo's population jumped from 600,000 to 1.5 million, making it the fastest growing city in the world. But Sao Paulo is no lone phenomenon. In the same 2 decades, many another big city has sprung up in Brazil, such as Belo Horizonte, spacious and modern, planned in its entirety before the first building went up. When, soon after Pearl Harbor, Sumner Welles arrived in Rio for a Pan-American conference, much was at stake. Failure of the principal South American nation to follow the U.S. might endanger the whole American plan of defense. In this crisis, Brazil was the first South American nation to declare war on fascist Germany and Italy. Even earlier at Natal and other points on the Brazilian Bulge, the U.S. got the right to build and operate its own military air bases on Brazilian soil. Within a few months, these bases were in full operation, the center of a system of military air transport lines greater than anything the pre-war world had ever seen. In hundreds of regularly scheduled flights a day, immense quantities of war supplies were speeding to armies fighting on 3 continents. Today, history records that without these bases and the planes and men flown from them, Rommel could never have been defeated in Tunisia. The Italian invasion probably could never have been launched. Even before America's Brazilian bases were in operation, João Alberto Lins de Barros, Brazil's able economic coordinator, had begun full cooperation with the United States in making available Brazil's strategic materials. One of the most vital of these is rubber. Though U.S. efforts to increase production of natural rubber were costly and only partially successful, the continuing yield has been great enough to constitute a valuable asset. Of great importance to altitude flyers is Brazil's Oiticica oil, which will not freeze however low the temperature. And without Brazil's vast resources in strategic minerals, the United Nations might conceivably have lost the war. Brazil is the only